Scott Radley Show, 900 CHML. If you recognize that music, it probably means that you are a gamer of some kind. Video games, computer games. Many of you either play or have played. And, you know, some people think, well, computer games. I don't play computer games. I don't play Xbox. I don't play PlayStation. Do you play Candy Crush on your phone? You're a gamer. Say, there you go. Everybody plays games, right? Well, you can now take that level of interest, that passion for Candy Crush, which I'm at about level 1100 and something right now, which is my admission that I probably shouldn't give. You can now take that and apply it to a university course in gaming. That's true. The history of gaming is being offered through Wilfrid Laurier University. The guy who is running it, the man who is behind this, is Canada's top video game collector. His name is Sid Bolton, and he joins me now. Sid, thanks for doing this today.
Hey, no problem, Scott. And I'm glad you identified the fact that people that play games on their phones are actually gamers, because you're absolutely right.
Well, that never dawned on me until recently, and someone made that point, and I said, yeah, you know what, I guess I am a gamer then. I played backgammon earlier this afternoon on my phone, and there you go. But, you know, the first thing people are going to hear, Sid, when they hear that there is now a university course in gaming is, what was basket weaving full? Like, this does not sound like it is the highest level of university education that people send their kids to school for.
Well, you know, the thing is that universities have long offered degrees in the studies of film. And so
True.
Why not move it into something where today's actual largest industry in terms of entertainment is video games? I mean, video games bring in more money than the film industry does. So why wouldn't we, teach our people that are up and coming, about the history of those games, how they're made, what got them started, and, potentially unlocking what is going to be the future of video games as well through looking at the past.
Would that be a good comparison? Like a film studies course to a gaming course? Is that kind of the idea of what you're shooting for, the equivalent?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the fact is that today a lot of people that have either started out in one industry or the other end up crossing over. So, for example, a good friend of mine who I went to high school with, who I grew up with, he, started out, he's an animator, and he just, wanted to work for Walt Disney and make films and do all that kind of stuff. And now he is a cinematics director on the Call of Duty games. So, and video games weren't something that he was even thinking about when he got into that. Maybe he played Pac-Man. I don't even really remember. But the point is that now he's working on, one of the largest video game franchises in the world. And, it started out certainly that he was just interested in being an animator and working in that industry. And it just ended up that that's where the jobs were. So that's where he went. And now he loves it. So it's quite interesting.
My first video game experience, really, my first video game that I owned, I got it for Christmas one time, and I bet you that there's a lot of people who would share this, was Pong. That was about 100 years ago now. I don't even know how long ago it was. It actually screwed up our TV set. It was such a rudimentary thing. It burned the image into the TV, so it was permanently etched now in the set. But was there anything actually before Pong, or was Pong the launching of this whole industry?
Well, actually, there was games that came well before Pong that, certainly weren't in our homes, but were actually at a university type level. So there was, in the 60s, there was something called Computer Space. There was a game that was actually created in the 50s called Tennis for Two, which was actually similar sort of in concept to Pong, but it was actually created on an oscilloscope, which is a device that's used to measure electronic signals, and believe it or not, had a screen on it. And so that's actually what somebody created a game on it that kind of inspired Pong. And then even before Pong was an actual product from Atari, there was actually a commercial product called the Magnavox Odyssey that came out in 1972, and that was actually a home console that had a Pong-like experience on it. In fact, Nolan Bushnell, the guy who founded Atari, had actually seen that product, and that is what inspired him to go on and have Pong created, and sort of the rest, as they say, is history. So it took until Pong for video games to become commercially popular. But before that, there was definitely some video games.
And were these things advanced even for their time, or for their time even they were pretty rudimentary? Because now we would look at it and go, Pong, I mean, it's two sticks and a little blip that goes back and forth. But were they complicated things at that time to make?
Well, Space War in the 60s was actually, by Steve Russell, was incredibly complex, and Computer Space, which Nolan Bushnell had done as well. Those were very, very complex, in fact, in some ways, and they were almost too complex. In fact, the reason that Nolan had actually said, let's do Pong is because it was so simple, because he had found when he had tried to make an arcade version of this very, expensive $1 million mainframe computer version of a game, he found the only people that liked it were other engineers and people like him. So, the average everyday person that was, say, at a bar or something having a drink just wanted to play something very simple. And so that's where Pong was born from. It was actually the idea of the simplicity was actually what made it successful. And so, we've obviously grown well beyond Pong, but in terms of getting society to sort of play games, also to have, both genders play games. Pong is something that both men and women would enjoy, for example. And there's been times where video games have maybe been more skewed towards men, but then we've also had great things like Pac-Man.
Well, let's get to that stuff, because by the 80s, this had become a men and women kind of thing. We got to take a break, but we're going to pick that up with Sid right after this. Stay with us.
The world seems to be spinning faster than ever before, and we put it all into perspective. We are Global News Radio, 900 CHML.
Music from Halo 2, another hugely popular video game. We're talking with Sid Bolton, curator of the Personal Computer Museum in Brantford, and the guy who's going to be teaching a course at Wilfrid Laurier University in the history of gaming. And Sid, just before we went to the break, we were talking about how there came a time after those early games when computer games, video games, very much became unisex. They became both boys, and I'll say men, but boys were playing, but also girls. By the 80s, you have Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man and Frogger and Donkey Kong and Q*bert and Space Invaders and Defender and all these games, which seem, for anyone who was of that era, those give you a real warm, fuzzy feeling when you think about those games. But even then, by today's standards, they are really rudimentary games.
They are, and that was considered to be sort of the golden age of video games, when video games were in the arcade.
Yes.
Really, really sort of revitalized the arcade business, as it were, and of course, also kind of led to the downfall of the arcade as well, right? As we were able to improve our technology and bring computers to the home that were just as powerful as stuff that we could have in the arcade, it effectively killed that business as well. So it's kind of interesting. And now, of course, the big question on everyone's mind is sort of, are digital downloads going to kill the video game business the way we know it today? And also, are things like, we were talking earlier about cell phones and how, if you play games on your phone, you are a gamer. But is that going to sort of kill the traditional console gaming experience? So these are all questions that we're going to talk about as we look back on the history of how the industry got to the point where it is today.
Was it around that time, that 1980s era, when all these games started coming out, that people realized this could be a massive business, or was it way before then that people realized this could actually be a lot of money?
Well, Don Bluth, who is an ex-Disney animator who created one of my favorite games, Dragon's Lair, he had actually wondered why one of his traditional movies, which was The Secret of NIMH, that he had animated, why hadn't it done that well in the theaters during the summer of that year that he brought it out? And the reason why is because everybody was in the arcades playing, these video games and spending literally billions of quarters on video games. And so that's kind of when the industry was like, maybe we have to take a hard look at whether or not, we're doing the right thing. And obviously, there's definitely, room for both forms of entertainment. There are people that, just love to go to the movies, and there's people that love to just play video games. And of course, there's people that love both. So there's no question about it. But I think definitely it was around 1983 or so where people started to say, this is actually a business that we have to take a serious look at. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Warner Brothers actually owned Atari, and sort of bought that early on. So here you're talking about an entertainment company who kind of had the thought that video games were actually going to be something that they needed to invest in. And today, of course, almost every entertainment company has some sort of stake in the video game business.
Well, to the point, I understand that that it's worth about $6 billion just in the U.S., the video game business a year now. Now, there's so many things I want to ask you about, but one of them, and I'm hoping you can take a minute or so to tell this story, and I know you know this story. I watched a documentary not that long ago, I think it was on Netflix, about what is pretty much universally considered the worst video game ever made, which was an E.T. video game. Can you tell the story of this? Because I found it actually hilarious that this was considered such a horrible failure.
So basically, when E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the movie, was coming out, everyone knew it was going to be a big hit in Hollywood. And so it was closing in on, when it was confirmed that indeed it was big in the theaters, it was the summer blockbuster that year. Basically, Atari was really getting into the licensing game, and they had to license some of the big hits. And they had actually licensed Raiders of the Lost Ark and things like that. So they knew that there was a good combination between movies and video games. And so they made a deal to bring out E.T. For the holiday season on the Atari 2600, which was kind of the top gaming system at the PlayStation of its time, as it were. And so basically they had made this deal to bring it out, but there was only around 6 weeks of development time that was available to have the game produced, because after the end of the 6 weeks, they had to get the cartridge manufactured, so there was lead times, and they had to be transferred to the stores and so on. And so they were so convinced that this game was going to be a hit, no matter what they made the game of. They weren't really thinking, here's a game and let's sell it. It was more like, we have to get this game out. We don't have a game yet. So they had one of their programmers. They said, you know what? If you can do this in 6 weeks, we're going to give you a big bonus. We're going to send you to Hawaii, all this kind of stuff. And so that's what happened, is that, one of their best game designers, because he had actually, it's kind of funny, you mentioned it's one of the worst games. And it isn't the worst video game by any stretch of the imagination ever made, but it is pretty poor. And a lot of people ended up returning it to the stores. And in fact, Atari ordered more cartridges than they had video game systems at the time, in the anticipation that this game would actually sell systems. And so, they ordered something like 10 million units. And then, of course, people started sending them back because they couldn't figure the game out. It was difficult. Children were not having fun. They were just, it was bad. And
they ended up burying thousands of them, apparently.
Yeah, so they literally had to destroy them. And so what they did was they buried them in a landfill in New Mexico.
New Mexico. Yep.
Yeah,
and the story, Sid, I got to jump in because, again, we're really short on time. I think it's still on Netflix. It's called Atari Game Over, if you want to watch the documentary.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting story.
It's pretty funny. Sid Bolton, you can find about him through Wilfrid Laurier through the museum in Kitchener. They're also tied into this if you are interested in this further. Sid, really appreciate the time today. Thanks for doing this.
No problem.
If you are interested, as I say, go to Wilfrid Laurier University website, look up Sid Bolton, S-Y-D, Bolton, computer or personal computer museum in Brantford. Look up the museum, all those places. You can find more information if you maybe want to take a university course in gaming. It's fascinating stuff.